Mabrika. Welcome, Soul Tribe, to this episode of Deep Soul Awakenings. Get ready to step into a place of visibility where your heart and intuition are your guides.
What's up, y'all? Welcome back to this week's episode of Deep Soul Awakenings. I'm your host, of course, Millie Franco. So I wanted to talk about something different this episode. I know that we were talking a lot about, for the past two episodes, in terms of abilities and what it's like, and sharing a bit of my story. But today it felt fitting, and my guides have actually been putting the thought in my head a lot, to speak about grief, death, mourning, everything that comes along with it. So I wanted to just share my experience and what I've learned about all of these things with all of you, so that it can help to give you all an understanding that, you know, we all process in our own kind of ways, and we all experience it differently, but in the ways that you are affected by it, and in the ways that it scares us sometimes or hurts, you're not alone, and we all feel it too. Of course, I start this with, you know, a reminder. It's still free Palestine, it's still free Congo, it's still free to Sudan, it's still free indigenous peoples, it's still free all of us from the conditioning of this world that we've been given. And it's always going to be a push and a prayer towards connection to spirit and everything that is. Sorry, I didn't mean to clear out my throat in your ear. My first experience with death, from what I can remember, started fairly young. I remember being a little kid, tiny, maybe like 5, 6, 7 years old, and I don't have a lot of memories from being a child, but I do have select ones. I've come to understand that that deals with me being a walk-in and needing to have specific memories, but having the understanding that when I experience these memories, when I remember these memories, they don't necessarily feel like my own. It's more of watching like a story be played out in my head. I remember I had a great uncle passed away, and I attended his funeral, and I was kind of oblivious, you know, as a kid, to what was going on. And I knew him, but I didn't know him well enough. I feel like when it came to meeting my family, I always met my family in funerals, never necessarily in good situations. And oddly enough, I have the smallest family. I have a family essentially of, my immediate family would be a family of 3, me and my 2 boys and one other person that we hold space for. Of course, I have my siblings, but my siblings have their own families, and we've all kind of gone our different ways, which is, of course, understandable, as people do as they get older. But yeah, my experience with that started really young, without the understanding of what it was. At that time, I remember people probably still do, they usually tell children that the person who is in the casket is sleeping, instead of telling them the reality of it and entrusting them to being able to process. I do different things differently with my son. When it comes to death, I've always told him the truth, and he experienced death, you know, under a year old. He experienced my mother's death. And my mother's death and processing is something that I wanted to talk about. Because with my mother, and feeling like my life was ending, it was like all of a sudden this beautiful person who I had lived my whole life with, because when they pass away, you don't feel as angry at them anymore. All of a sudden, this person that I had never known how to live life without wasn't here anymore. They weren't here to be able to guide me anymore, or to even to talk to me or fight with me, because at this point, I definitely take an argument if it meant I would be able to speak to my mother again. But I remember the underlying feeling when she passed away was one of guilt. There was guilt for everything that I didn't do. There was guilt for the things that I did do that I felt that I could have done better. There was guilt for me being the person that I was and being the way that I was. It was literally guilt for everything. But then underneath the guilt, or I guess maybe I should say on top of the guilt, was this anger. I remember being so mad at her for leaving. And then it dredged up this abandonment wound, where I felt like everyone I loved abandoned me. And I don't know when it was that I started feeling that way. I just can always remember having the feeling. And I was just so mad at her. And it reminded me of all the times that I was mad at her in life. I remember one of my last experiences with my mother, when she had gotten really sick. She couldn't really do anything for herself. And at the time, I don't know if I was in denial or if the anger got the best of me or what it was, but I would still come and I would still help her. I had just had a baby and I was going through mourning at the time because I had always had this picture in my mind of me having a baby and my mother showing me as she had done for my sisters, or guiding me at least on how to raise this baby. Because she was the mom. She's supposed to teach us how to take care of the kids. She's supposed to guide us. And here I was in the situation where I had a baby, a beautiful miracle baby, because before I had my son Julian, I was told I couldn't have children. And then suddenly I was pregnant. With my son Julian, I knew he was a boy before he was born. My mother was very much like me. She was clairvoyant. And I remember her telling me that somebody was going to have a baby at first. And I was like, oh, well, you're crazy. It's not me. But it was me. And then her telling me that she had a dream with a beautiful little boy with light eyes and blonde hair and pale skin. And, in this dream, they were so in love with each other and he was so beautiful. And I remember laughing to myself because I was like, Mom, there's no way this baby's coming out white. Like his dad is black, Puerto Rican and Dominican. Like chances are this baby is not going to have blonde hair and blue eyes. And sure enough, she was right. So, I had always envisioned in my mind this experience of them being together and watching them together and her showing me how to be a mom. And here I was, and here he was. And my mom couldn't do it. My mom at the time was depending on us to take care of her. And it was difficult to take in. And, that mourning is there because mourning essentially is, and I think Kale Kalakahi said it best, grief is love's natural way to honor what it misses. And to me, this sense of mourning, this sense of grief was because I missed this beautiful picture that I had painted in my head of what it would be like to have a baby. And even when I gave birth, I remember being so scared because she My mom, of course, was sick at the time. She couldn't leave the house, and she physically couldn't leave the house, and I was in labor. And at the time, I didn't realize, but I knew something was wrong. And my older son had the umbilical cord wrapped around his neck and his body, and he was losing oxygen. And I kept telling the nurses, the midwives, something's wrong, something's wrong. And they kept telling me that nothing was wrong. And I remember crying to my sister, wishing for my mom to be there because my mom would know what to do. My mom had this ferocity about her, this fieriness that if I would have told her something was wrong, she would have made sure that they knew something was wrong. She kept calling my sister and asking my sister how I was. And I remember looking at my sister and telling her, that's mommy on the phone. And I know she knows something's wrong. She can feel it like I feel it. Of course, my sister told me no. She told me the truth after. But, even in that aspect, there was a sense of grief for the experience that I would never get to experience. So while she was alive and I took care of her, there was always this grief that I carried from this life. And I've learned that it also stems from past lives where there was just always this inherent sadness that manifested into anger. And I always found myself so mad at her. And the last day that I spent with her, I remember I helped her get into the shower. She kissed me. My mom wasn't a very affectionate person. I remember she kissed me and she hugged me and she thanked me for helping her. I waited till she got into the bath and I moved away. And I guess my inner child must have came out. My inner child was so angry. And when she couldn't see me, I remember wiping this kiss off of my face and being mad. And then when I saw her for the last time in the hospital after she had taken her last breath, which none of us got to see, but I felt. I remember beating myself up and feeling so guilty about that moment. And not understanding why it was that I did that. And I beat myself up about that for, years. I just felt like the shittiest person. And I know now that, that was just the trauma talking. That was the conditioning talking. That was the anger of my inner child. How could she be sick when I needed her? That victim mindset, making it seem as if everything is a direct reflection of you. And it was just crazy how much I let that one moment, that one moment that I told myself I was guilty for, be the determining factor of how I felt in my mother's death and how I allowed myself to beat myself up for everything that I didn't do instead of the things that I could do. And I know now. And when I came to that moment, I did the best that I could with the situation that I had, with the tools that I had at the time. I couldn't have done any better in that moment because I wasn't capable of it. And in that moment, I was giving 100% because I gave it everything that I had. And I've gone through a lot of healing with my mother and her death. I'm lucky that I see her in dreams. I'm lucky that she speaks to me. But I realize that for a lot of people, sometimes they don't get those moments. And they carry that guilt. And they carry that grief with them. So I just wanted to take this moment to say that. And everything that I've learned in all of the spirits that I have come in contact with people who have passed away, none of those things that you didn't do or that you couldn't do or the things that you beat yourself up for or you wish that you could have done differently, none of those things matter. With all of the spirits that I have come across, they remember you with love. They love you. They want you to do well. They want to guide you. They want to help you along your path. Because when we're released from our physical bodies and the conditioning of the world no longer weighs on us, in my opinion, to me, we come back to what we truly are, to that sense of authenticity and that sense of unconditional love. So I say to all of you who may be listening, who may have experienced similar things, have lost loved ones, and allow themselves to kind of just be full of that guilt. Forgive yourself. Because the people that you love have already forgiven you. They don't hold it against you. Everything that happens in this life happens in the exact way that it's supposed to be. You know, and I sat with grandfather medicine, and in ceremony I realized, you know, that even with everything that I understand and all of the tools that I have and what I can feel and what I can see at times, there is just this sense of loss when it comes to that physical body, man. You really miss that person's energy in that physical body. And missing that never goes away. It's something that you carry. And in everything that I've learned and in all the books that I've read, I found the most beautiful reasoning for it, the most beautiful way of explaining it. And sorry, I know I have like a little bit of the inhales. It's because I get emotional when I speak, because I always speak from my heart. But I read this book, it's called The Sacred Shield, and in The Sacred Shield I learned that each one of us has a song, beautiful song, you know, medicine that our soul plays. And in my interpretation of life and living, I've learned that when we have our soul families, when we have our families, when we have our parents, when we have our mother, when we have our children, our soul songs all come together and they start to create these beautiful symphonies together. And it becomes this music that guides us and moves us through life and reminds us at times of the beauty of the connectedness when we aren't focused on the trauma and the sadness. And we grow accustomed to these symphonies playing within our daily lives. And then when someone passes away, all of a sudden that person's song is no longer playing with your symphony, and there is this absence of it, and the music doesn't sound the same anymore. It just sounds so different, and the song is unknown, and it's not as beautiful. And there is a sense of loss when people say, you know, oh, they passed away and they took a piece of me with them. You know, they're not lying. There's a piece of that symphony. what I've learned is that when that person, that beautiful energy, that being goes into spirit, their song becomes part of the symphonies of the orchestra of the universe. And it now plays with that song. And all you need to do to remember that song, to feel that connection, is connect with spirit, connect to the universe, connect to the earth, and you'll hear it again, and you'll find that love again, and you will find that resonance again, because it's always there for you. It's never gone. Energy never dies. But with all that said, the missing of that physical body will always be there. Because, as humans, we always want something tangible. I remember being a kid, and my first memory that I have of being scared of death, being scared of the unknown, was also with my mother, where I would think as a little kid of my mother passing away, and I would literally have these horrible, horrible panic attacks where I wouldn't know what to do with myself. It felt like the walls were closing in. I couldn't breathe. And I would immediately throw myself into the bath, into the water, to soothe myself without recognizing at the time, but also already knowing, because as children, we know so much. It's the conditioning that makes us forget. The water holds the memory. So all I needed to do to remember that death wasn't the end was submerge myself in water, and I was okay. With all that I've learned, I had thought that I healed all of this. And recently it came up for me again, where I thought of one of my sons dying, and I went into that panic attack, and I couldn't deal with myself. And I submerged myself in water, because in that moment I realized the water soothes me. And I realized that maybe I hadn't healed that piece of me. And then I realized that the reason why it came up was because it was something that my older son was experiencing. And we talk very freely about past lives, about life, about all of the things. Because I don't want him to have to work to remember what he already knows. But 2 nights ago, we sat and we spoke about death. And, I told him that it wasn't the end. It was just the end of this life. And that we go to another life, and we live again, and we see the people that we love again. And sometimes we may not remember the life that we had before. But there's like this pull that we have to people, this love that we automatically have for people that we bring with us that resonates. And then sometimes we know that we've known and loved those people before, and I went into talking to him about a life that I know that I've had with him, where he wasn't my son, he was my partner at the time, which I've mentioned before. And we just sat and we spoke so much and processed together, and I let him know that no matter what, the energy that I am would always be with him, and it would always guide him, and I promised to send him signs. Because if there's anything that I know in my mother's death, she always sends me signs when I ask to let me know that she is there. Especially now that my eye is open, and my mind is open, and my heart is open. And I realized that the reason why all of these things were coming up was because these things were something that needed to be acknowledged in him. And that was a pattern that was broken, because when I was a child, I didn't have the confidence to speak to my mother about it. But with my son, it's so different. And that fear, that crippling fear that drives anxiety and panic attacks, would not be passed down to him. I would stop with me. I've had the ability and the blessing to remember many of my past lives. Many of it I've remembered through accessing the Akashic records. some of it I've remembered through being able to just see the clairvoyance with the dreams, with the visions. And what I was shown essentially was that in many of my other lives, I loved this being, this energy. Some people would call it a twin flame. For me, there's too much negative stigma, connotations attached to twin flames. To me, the term that I was given was a mirrored soul. I was shown lives where I had lost this person multiple times, countless times. I was shown lives where he was taken and killed. I was shown lives where he had died and I didn't understand why. I was shown one life where I was the priestess and I was giving his body to the ocean after he had died. And I came to understand after that I had also given myself to the ocean after he had died, because I couldn't bear the grief of not being able to be with him. That physical body. I also remember being pregnant at the time. So while sitting with grandfather in ceremony, he gave me the understanding that grief was something that I had carried with me from other lifetimes, from many lifetimes, with the loss of this person that I've loved in so many different bodies. It allowed me to see that I was also carrying grief for the things that my mother would never get to experience that I was experiencing. And I remember I sat there and I cried the hardest I've ever cried, because I would never be able to show her that there was a different life that she could live, different choices that she could make, that she could let go of so many things and just be happy. But now I realize that just wasn't in the plan for her this lifetime. And I always say that if she gives me the ability to be her mother in another lifetime, I would take it, because I would be able to show her so much love, so much healing. But I say this all to say, all of us at some point feared death. All of us at some point have lost someone that we loved deeply, that's affected us in ways that we can't explain. But you have the ability to take this and to determine what you do with this energy. You can allow this energy to consume you. You can allow it to become guilt and manifest as anger. Or you can allow the situation to allow you to remember the love, to reconnect with spirit, to reconnect with everything that is, so that you can deepen your understanding in the aspect that energy never dies. And the people that you love, the energy that they are, the spirit that they are, the soul that they are, never really leaves you. It's always with you to some extent. And in order to remember, you just need to listen. Listen to the beautiful music, the medicine that the universe plays for you, that the universe guides you to, the medicine that you have inside, so that you can reconnect with the knowing that this body that you're in is a gift for you to experience this life. And how this life will be and which way it will go, you get to decide. But no matter what, always remember that you are enough. and you are loved. And with that, I say that anytime you feel lost, just remember to look to the stars and allow your ancestors to guide you back home. Remember to always be kind to yourself. Sending you so much love.
Ari Kamabu, thank you for listening to this episode. We look forward to continuing to find our way back to indigeneity with all of you. May your heart continue to be your guide. And remember that whenever you feel lost, you can look to the stars, and your ancestors will help you find your way back home.